Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean at midnight, the stars reflected in the water below, and you realize you cannot see the bottom, you cannot measure the horizon, and yet you know, with every cell of your being, that something immeasurably profound lies beneath the surface. That is the feeling Sheikh Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani leaves in the heart of every honest reader who opens Futuh al-Ghaib, Revelations of the Unseen. This book is not a text you read, it is a text that reads you. It holds a mirror to the innermost chambers of your soul, and what you see in that mirror may terrify you, humble you, break you, and ultimately remake you into something far greater than you ever imagined yourself capable of becoming. That is the extraordinary power of this timeless spiritual masterpiece. Abd al-Qadir al-Jilani was born in 1077 CE in the region of Gilan, Persia, and he became one of the most towering figures in the history of Islamic spirituality. He is revered across the entire Muslim world as the Sultan of Saints, Ghawth al-Azam, the Supreme Helper. A man whose spiritual rank was so elevated that even centuries after his death in 1166 CE, millions of souls continue to draw inspiration, comfort, and guidance from his words, his life, and his legacy. Futuh al-Ghaib, which translates as Revelations of the Unseen or Secrets of the Unseen, is a collection of 78 discourses. These were not academic lectures or philosophical debates. They were living, breathing, fire-lit talks delivered to students and seekers who sat at his feet, hungry for truth, hungry for God, hungry for something real in a world full of illusion and distraction. A hunger, one might add, that is no less fierce today than it was 9 centuries ago. The very first discourse of the book establishes a foundation that can shake a sincere reader to the core. Al-Jilani states that the true believer, the sincere seeker, must surrender all conditions to Allah, not some conditions, not the easy ones, all of them. This is not the surrender of weakness, it is the surrender of the warrior who has fought every battle within himself and finally understands that true strength lies not in control, but in trust, complete and unconditional trust in the wisdom of the divine. We live in a world that tells us constantly to be in control. Control your destiny, control your narrative, control your outcomes. Self-help shelves are stacked high with books promising you the 7 steps to mastery, the 12 laws of success, the ultimate formula for getting exactly what you want. And yet, how many people who follow all these formulas still lie awake at 3 in the morning, gripped by anxiety, haunted by a nameless emptiness that no achievement can fill? Al-Jilani understood this emptiness intimately. He teaches in this remarkable book that the disease of the human soul is not ignorance, it is the illusion of self-sufficiency. The moment a person believes they are the architect of their own fate, entirely independent of divine support and guidance, they have severed themselves from the very source of life, meaning, and peace. This is not theology for its own sake. This is a diagnosis of the most widespread spiritual illness of every era, and it is a diagnosis that strikes with surgical precision. One of the most profound themes running through Futuh al-Ghaib is the concept of annihilating the ego not as an act of self-destruction, but as an act of liberation. Al-Jilani uses the Arabic concept of fana, the dissolution of the ego in the divine presence, and he explains it not in abstract mystical poetry, but in the concrete, visceral language of a surgeon who knows exactly where the wound is. He says, in effect, that as long as you are attached to your own wants, your own plans, your own pride, you are a prisoner, and the cell walls of that prison are made of your own desires. This teaching cuts across all cultures and all centuries because the ego does not change. The ego in the 9th century behaved exactly as the ego in the 21st century behaves. It demands recognition. It fears loss. It clings to comfort. It builds entire castles of identity around things, possessions, status, reputation, relationships, and then lives in constant terror of those castles crumbling. Al-Jilani does not ask you to destroy those castles with your bare hands. He asks you to see, truly see, that they were never real to begin with. The book is also a masterclass in understanding what it means to be tested. Al-Jilani writes with extraordinary compassion about the nature of divine trials. He does not offer the shallow reassurance that everything happens for a reason, and therefore you should simply smile and move on. His understanding is far deeper and far more demanding than that. He teaches that when calamity strikes, when loss comes, when the earth seems to crack beneath your feet, that is precisely the moment when the quality of your connection with Allah is revealed to yourself. He says that the believer who remains patient, who remains grateful, who turns toward God rather than away from God in the moment of trial, that person is not merely surviving the storm. That person is being transformed by it, refined by it, elevated by it in ways that no period of comfort and ease could ever achieve. Trials are not punishments in his framework. They are promotions from a Lord who loves his servant enough to forge them in fire rather than leave them as raw ore. Another dimension of this book that continues to resonate with profound relevance is its treatment of sincerity, Ikhlas in Arabic. Al-Jilani is ruthless, lovingly ruthless on this point. He writes that the greatest danger to the spiritual traveler is not the obvious sins, not the visible failures, but the hidden corruption of intention. A person can perform all the outward acts of worship, prayer, fasting, charity, pilgrimage, and still be spiritually bankrupt if those actions are tainted by the desire for human praise, social approval, or self-congratulation. He warns with remarkable clarity about what later Sufi scholars would call al-Riya, ostentation or showing off. He describes a person who performs good deeds for the applause of others as someone who is cashing a divine check at the wrong bank. The check is real, the action was performed, but because the intention was misdirected toward human eyes rather than the divine eye, the spiritual reward is entirely lost. This is not a comfortable teaching. It demands of every reader a brutal honesty about why they really do what they do. And this is where Futuh al-Ghaib becomes genuinely transformative rather than merely interesting. Most books of spiritual wisdom can be appreciated from a comfortable distance. You can read them, nod at them, find them intellectually stimulating, and then set them down and return to your life unchanged. Al-Jilani's discourses do not allow that luxury to the honest reader. They reach through the pages, take hold of something deep inside the chest, and refuse to let go until you have looked at yourself with complete honesty. There is a discourse in this book in which al-Jilani addresses the believer who is suffering and asking why God has not answered their prayers. His response is one of the most moving and instructive pieces of spiritual writing in the entire Islamic tradition. He explains that the apparent silence of God in response to your supplication is not abandonment, it is education. Allah knows, he writes, what you need far better than you know what you want. And these are very often two entirely different things. He uses the image of a loving, wise physician who withholds from a sick patient the food the patient desperately craves because that very food would worsen the illness. The patient weeps, the patient pleads, the patient may even feel angry and betrayed. But the physician acts from knowledge and love, not cruelty. This image has the power to entirely reframe how a suffering person understands their relationship with the divine, and in that reframing can lie tremendous healing and peace. Al-Jilani also devotes considerable attention in these discourses to the relationship between outward action and inward state. He is emphatically not a quietist who teaches withdrawal from the world in favor of passive contemplation. He insists that the spiritual journey must manifest in the world, in behavior, in service, in justice, in the treatment of other human beings. A person who claims to have reached spiritual heights while treating their neighbors, their family, their community with arrogance or indifference has not reached any height at all. They have merely climbed to a greater altitude of self-deception. This is a teaching of enormous practical importance. It means that the measure of your spiritual progress is not how long you can sit in meditation or how beautifully you can recite sacred texts. The measure is how you behave when you are tired, when you are wronged, when you are frightened, when you are hungry for recognition and no one is giving it to you. The measure is the texture of your ordinary human interactions, day after day, in the unspectacular fabric of daily life. The discourse on Tawakkul, reliance on God, is among the most celebrated passages in this entire book, and rightly so. Al-Jilani draws a careful and important distinction between genuine tawakkul and what might be called spiritual laziness dressed up in pious language. True reliance on God does not mean sitting passively and waiting for the world to arrange itself around your wishes. It means taking every step that wisdom and ability make available to you, and then releasing the outcome entirely into divine hands, without anxiety, without manipulation, without the desperate need to control what cannot be controlled. This balance between full human effort and full divine trust is one of the most practically difficult things any person of faith is asked to maintain. Al-Jilani understands its difficulty. He does not minimize it, but he shows, through the luminous clarity of his teaching, that this balance is not only possible, but that it is, in fact, the only way to live a life of genuine peace and genuine dignity. Everything else is either paralysis or delusion. What makes this book particularly remarkable for a 21st century reader is how thoroughly it demolishes the modern assumption that spiritual depth is incompatible with intellectual rigor. Al-Jilani was not a man who traded in vague feelings and comfortable sentimentalities. He was a towering scholar of Islamic jurisprudence, a master of hadith, a man of encyclopedic learning. When he speaks about the unseen world, about the states of the heart, about the nature of divine love and divine testing, he speaks with the authority of someone who has traversed the inner landscape himself, not as a tourist, but as a cartographer. The book's title, Revelations of the Unseen, points to something that deserves careful attention. In Arabic spiritual discourse, al-Ghaib, the unseen, refers not merely to the supernatural or the metaphysical. It refers to the deep interior reality of the human being, the hidden movements of the heart, the invisible currents that shape outward behavior, and the ultimately unknowable nature of divine wisdom. Al-Jilani lifts the veil on all of these dimensions with remarkable skill and courage. He lifts the veil, for instance, on the hidden pride of the devout, the way religious practice can, paradoxically, become a source of spiritual arrogance rather than spiritual humility. He lifts the veil on the hidden despair of the seeker who measures their progress and finds themselves always wanting. He lifts the veil on the hidden greed that can motivate even acts of charity and the hidden fear that masquerades as piety. He does all of this not to shame the reader, but to set them free, because a wound that is seen can be healed, while a wound that is hidden will only deepen. Reading Futuh al-Ghaib is, in the most honest sense, an act of moral courage. It requires a willingness to sit with discomfort, to let the teachings disturb the settled sediment of your self-understanding, to question the stories you have been telling yourself about your own goodness, your own sincerity, your own spiritual progress. And it is this very willingness to be disturbed, to be unsettled, to be cracked open, that al-Jilani identifies as the beginning of genuine spiritual transformation. The soul, he teaches, is like a field. Before seeds can be planted, the ground must be broken. And breaking the ground is not a pleasant process for the ground. It requires force. It requires disruption. It requires the dismantling of the hard crust that has formed over the surface. But without that breaking, there is no planting, and without planting, there is no harvest. The great saints of every tradition have understood this. Al-Jilani articulates it with a precision and power that few have matched. 900 years after these discourses were first delivered in Baghdad, they continue to be read, studied, memorized, and wept over by seekers across every continent on earth. They are read in the quiet rooms of scholars and in the humble homes of ordinary believers. They are read in Arabic, in Persian, in Urdu, in English, in Turkish, in Malay, in every language that has carried the Islamic spiritual tradition. That endurance across 9 centuries and across every cultural boundary is not an accident. It is the signature of authentic truth. What Futuh al-Ghaib ultimately offers, and this may be its greatest gift, is not a method, but a vision of what the human being can become when it stops fighting with reality, stops grasping at the passing world, stops building its sense of worth on things that crumble, and instead roots itself in the one thing that does not crumble, the living, luminous presence of the divine in the depths of the heart. That vision, once glimpsed, changes everything. It changes how you wake up in the morning, how you face difficulty, how you treat people, how you understand your own suffering and your own joy. So I leave you with this invitation, the same invitation that Qadir al-Jilani extended to his students 9 centuries ago in the streets and circles of medieval Baghdad. Come to this book not as a consumer looking for information, not as a critic looking for argument, but as a traveler who has walked a very long road, who is dusty and tired and secretly, desperately hoping that somewhere, in some language, some human being has managed to put into words the deepest truth of the human experience. Because that traveler will not be disappointed. In these pages, one of the greatest souls who ever walked this earth is waiting, with patience, with wisdom, and with a love for every sincere seeker that has not dimmed by a single degree across the span of nearly 1,000 years.